Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about truth. So let's get into it. So basically the question in question today was, Frederick, what are some great truths about programming? And this is a pretty good question. It's a very hard question to answer. It's also very subjective, but I will try to relay the only real truth that I found myself to be like, well, it's not the only truth, I suppose, but it is the truth that I think stand out the most. It's the thing that I kind of carry with me. It's the thing that I try to consider whenever I work on anything or whenever I'm part of anything when it comes to programming. So the great truth of programming to summarize it, I would say is that code always changes. Always. No exceptions. It always changes. And the reason why I think this is such an important thing to carry with you is because it affects everything that you do. It is the thing that will, well, if you allow it to be with you, whenever you write a feature, whenever you estimate work, whenever you talk to coworkers, you interact with coworkers, or you code review other people's code, whatever you do, if you always ask this simple question, and it's actually very easy. The question is, will this change? And if it changes, how easy will it be for me to change it? And how likely is it to change, and in what direction? So that's the core thing here. How likely is this to change, and in what direction will it change? And this touches on many levels. One part is that your knowledge of feature development and your knowledge of software development is going to play in quite a lot here. This is where experience actually kind of comes into play. This is the thing that makes the real difference between a junior programmer and a senior one, because although a junior programmer may be able to solve a given problem, it's very hard for a junior programmer to ask and answer this question accurately because they don't actually have the experience. They haven't been on the other side of things. You see, if you're building something for the very first time and you are pretty much never in a situation where you are around for long enough to see what the outcome of your development actually is. This is a classic, it's actually a very common problem in small companies, in like agencies and things like that, where a developer will start on a greenfield project, develop something in accordance with whatever practices are like best practices right now, and then simply move on to the next thing. This is the thing that I've warned you a little bit about when I say that there is a big difference between working as a true professional programmer and someone who writes some code. Because if you are always in the position that you always start from scratch, you never have to think about long term, you never have to think about sustainability, you never have to think about any of that, you will never ever be able to write as good as software as well as somebody who is forced to consider these sorts of things. Not from the perspective of bigger companies, because remember, it's extremely easy in software to start from nothing. It's very easy generally to build something that is, I mean, you can pick any tool. If it's a greenfield project, it doesn't matter what tool you pick. You can always pick whatever you want. But if you then ship that and you have to go back and maintain it over and over, or change that one thing over and over and over, that's when things start to accumulate. That's when the problems really start to come into play. That never happens if you're never forced to deal with decisions maybe 6 months later that you take today, right? And the same thing comes into play when you have coworkers, and it's almost, when you're good at this, it almost becomes a sixth sense. It's a sixth sense. It's almost like you can predict the future. I've seen this happen many times where I talk to my coworkers. I see that okay, they implemented something in a certain way, or we discussed considerations before a story. And basically, I can almost hear when we made a bad decision, like already, because I know my coworkers, I know the needs of the business, and I know historically what has happened when we make certain types of decisions. And I'll give you a concrete example to not be all that fluffy. An example was the other day we were talking about a configuration system. So we have a business requirement where we basically need to have a fairly heavy customization need on one of our systems, right? And based on my experience, I know that the most feasible way to solve this sort of problem is through a configuration system, a pretty elaborate one, where you have different feature toggles that you can flip into different states, and then you can configure the state of your application based on that, right? Now, the first thing that my coworker says is that, all right, we will simply use, in this case, it's just a Scala case class, and we will just do it that way. And I just didn't say anything at the time because I don't want to, I'll let them kind of discover what the limitation and the problem with that is by themselves, because it's low risk. It's better for them to discover the problem themselves than it is for me to start pushing it at that stage. And the first thing that I knew was going to happen happens, where they say, oh yeah, damn it, that's not going to work. And I go, why? Why won't it work? Well, it's simple, because the case classes in Scala cannot support the amount of field variables that we would need in order to sustain a configuration system that is that large. Because simply put, we have more configurations than a case class actually supports. Done and done, right? And that's where this magic moment happens. This is the thing where I've said, like, if you know what's going to happen next, you can predict it, and you know that the decision that is going to be made is either going to be a good one or it's going to be a bad one, even if maybe not everybody at the table actually understand that themselves. So the first thing happens, then they say, all right, but you know what? It's a bit of a hassle to deal with this, so let's just, let's do this. We're just going to start grouping keys instead. Now, for those of you who may not realize this, if you have a case class, or like a class of some sort, and you're only allowed a certain amount of field variables, you can simply encapsulate those field variables in another set of another class and go from there. In effect, what you're doing is that you're just reducing the top level field variables and putting them inside another object, and then you can continue that process if you wanted to. So you can kind of squeeze, as long as you group things in subsequent case classes, you can actually achieve this goal. And that makes me cringe in my body immediately, and I say, well, maybe this is probably not the way to go here, because basically what you're doing is that you're forcing a solution. Like you just decided that you wanted this case class system, but maybe it's a better approach to use a map system of some sort, where you have maybe enumerations for the different configurations or something like that, because the map can contain as many configurations as we could possibly want, right? And my coworker nods and said, yeah, but yeah, I suppose you're right, but we're a little bit on short, like we just want to get this done, right, and we just want to ship it. And I go, well, there's really no deadline. Like, it's not like you're behind schedule. You could just do this. Yeah, but this is easier right now, and maybe in the future we will change it. And I go, all right, but you know that you're not, right? And they go, what do you mean? Of course we are. No, you're not. You see, what's going to happen is that you are going to put us down this path, and people are going to continue adding on it, most likely not even you. And when they hit this problem that I've talked about, because you're basically just pushing the problem further down, what are you going to do when there's another case class configuration somewhere where the limitation has been hit, like the cap of how many keys you can have is hit? At that point, you might actually be in a situation where now it doesn't even make sense to group things anymore, but you're going to shim in the forced grouping. You're going to force yourself to group, because it's lower effort for you to just force yourself to create another grouping than it is to rewrite the whole thing. And that's the problem, because you've started us on a path where it's more likely that the next person coming, that they're simply going to add to this problem, as opposed to just rethinking it and go, this would be much nicer in a map or some other construct, and rewrite it, because that's how a developer would behave, especially when you consider that most of the time they're going to be on some type of deadline. They're going to have a small story where they want to focus on just getting stuff done or something. I mean, he's doing it himself right now. He's just interested in getting stuff done. So the decision that he's making right now will actually have a much longer impact on the project than he expects. And this is the sort of thing I'm talking about. You just, whenever you develop something, you always have to think about what is the most likely thing to happen here. And that comes down, that's a more profound thing than you think, than you make think. Because as I said, it comes down to how well do you know yourself? How well do you know other people? How well do you know the business, like the actual, the big picture of your company? What are the likely scenarios as to what's going to happen if you make this decision? So what I want you to take away from this is that, at least for me, one of the biggest truths or profound truths within software development is that code always changes. And if you have that with you, and you have a mindset where whenever you build something, you consider what is the most likely thing to change here, what's the most likely next thing that's going to happen to this code that you are writing now, you can actually start to make decisions that have long-spanning effects consciously instead of unconsciously. And that's the difference between getting to legacy and having something that is fairly sustainable. Have a great day.